Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Residence Lecture Series. Oh, I turned on my hearing aid. It sounds good in here. We have an extra treat today because we not only have a distinguished speaker we're all looking forward to hearing, but as a representative from Google, he and others have arranged for this talk to be taped. So this is going to be a Google tape on record after this. That's what's going on in the back of the room. The speaker will be introduced today by one of our Residence Lecture Series committee members, Bill Anderson, who has known our speaker, Dr. Cerf.
I'm Bill Anderson. On behalf of the Residence Lecture Committee, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to introduce to you Vint Cerf, who will speak on tracking the Internet into the 21st century. The Internet is used by millions of people around the world every day. If it was owned by somebody and they charged 1 cent each time you clicked on, it would be by far the richest company in the world, or probably the richest country in the world. If one of your grandchildren asks you, what is the Internet? How does it work? Who manages it? Who owns it? How many of us can give the correct answers? Vint Cerf will now give us all the answers. He holds a bachelor's of degree science in mathematics from, guess where? Stanford, as well as a master of science degree and PhD in computer science from UCLA. So in a sense, he's one of us Californians, especially as his personal tastes include fine wines and gourmet cooking. He's currently Vice President and Chief Internet, listen to this now, Vice President and Chief Internet Evangelist for Google. He's universally recognized as the co-designer of the Internet. In this country, he has received the U.S. National Medal of Technology, the Turing Award, sometimes called the Nobel Prize of Computer Science, and in 2005, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian award given by the United States to a citizen. He has also received numerous awards. Oh, all right. He serves as chairman of the board of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. You may have wondered who approves all the addresses you and the website use and how it is controlled, so perhaps he will tell us. Vint has received numerous awards and commendations in connection with his work on the Internet from all over the world, including countries such as China, Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, and so on. I'm not going to list all his many honorary degrees, but I'm sure you can look them up on Google if nowhere else. So without further ado, please welcome Vint Cerf, co-father of the Internet.
Thank you very much, Bill. And I have to tell you this, I can't tell you what a special pleasure it is to be here. I'm seeing some faces that I haven't seen in a while, some familiar ones, and I expect I'm going to meet some new ones. I'm staying here for dinner, which brings up something called theorem number 208. The theorem reads, if you feed them, they'll come. And I'm being fed, so here I am. The other thing I wanted to acknowledge is two people especially who are in the room tonight. Don Nielsen, if you'll wave your hand, please. Don was one of the principals involved in the packet radio system, which I'll tell you about. It was one of the 3 networks that fed into the design of the Internet. And the other person is Bill Perry, who you all know is in the front row, just back from Japan. Bless your heart, sir. Am I audible if I'm at this level?
Yes. Yes.
Then we're going to go this way until my voice gets out. Anyway, thank you, Bill, for joining us tonight. The reason that Bill Perry is special, apart from many other good reasons, is that he was in the Defense Department responsible for research and engineering during the time that the Internet was undergoing its rapid evolution in the research world at the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency where I worked. And from time to time, Bill was kind enough to stop in and ask what the heck are you guys doing now? So we now know a little bit more about what we were doing 30 years later. It turned into something bigger than we expected. Let me explain a little bit about the title. When I came to work at Google, they asked me, what title do you want? And I said, well, how about Archduke? I thought that sounded pretty good. And then somebody reminded me that the last Archduke was Ferdinand. He was assassinated in 1914 and it started World War I. And so we thought maybe this would be a bad idea. And they said, considering what you've been doing for the last 30 years, why don't we call you our Chief Internet Evangelist? So on the first day of work, I thought I should wear something ecclesiastical. So in my closets are an outfit that I got from the University of the Balearic Islands. They're formal academic robes, and it was the most ecclesiastical outfit I owned. So I showed up for work on my first day at Google wearing this outfit, and Eric Schmidt, the CEO, grabbed his camera and took this picture. So I'm not dressed in my formal robes, just in my usual three-piece suit tonight. Also, in case this is a completely unexpected extra slide in the deck, my wife and I spent a week in southern India, in a place called Kerala. And there's a big lake called Lake Vembanad. And on this lake are houseboats that look like this one. And I madly took pictures of these things because they look like Hobbit holes from the Lord of the Rings. So I took a bunch of these pictures and I sent them to Peter Jackson, whom I had met a few months before in New Zealand, and said, Peter, if you're wondering where all the hobbits went, they're in southern India on Lake Vembanad on these houseboats. So if you get nothing else from tonight's lecture than the fact that the hobbits are in southern India, you've got to do something valuable. All right, so let's talk a little bit about statistics. If this were 1997, 10 years ago, I would be crowing about the fact that there are 22.5 million computers on the internet and 50 million users. Holy cow, that's a big number. Well, it was a big number in 1997, but fast forward 10 years, there are over 1 billion users of the internet and over 400 million servers, things that do email and web services and the like, not counting things like laptops or desktops or personal digital assistants like this BlackBerry that are occasionally connected to the net, not necessarily on all the time. So there might be as many as 1 billion devices on the net total from time to time. Now the other phenomenon which has occurred over the last 10 years or so has been a dramatic growth in mobile telephone communication. There are now estimated to be 2.5 billion mobiles in use around the world. The reason that's relevant to any talk about the internet is that many of these devices are now internet enabled. And the consequence of that, which I'll talk about a little more later, is that those of us who are offering services on the net, like Google, have to learn how to present those services through a relatively limited interface on a mobile device. So that's becoming very important. Also, for many people in the world, their first exposure to the internet will be through a mobile rather than through a laptop or a desktop, because the mobiles are less expensive and more widely available. I thought you'd find it interesting to look at the predecessor to the internet, the ARPANET. In 1969, there were 4 nodes installed by December of 1969. I was a graduate student at UCLA in Len Kleinrock's laboratory, responsible for the software for this computer called the Sigma 7, connected to the very first node installed on the ARPANET. The Sigma 7 is in a museum now, and there are a few people who suggest that I should be there along with them. And in fact, you could go down the street to the Computer History Museum, and I know several of you are well familiar with this, Gene Amdahl in particular. There are lots of computers that I remember from my early programming days that it's a little stunning to realize they're sitting in a museum now. In any case, that was the network before it became the internet, the 4-node ARPANET. Now, this is the part I love. Some people think that the internet happened because a lot of local area networks kind of got together and hooked themselves into a giant network of networks. Well, that's not what happened. What happened is that the Defense Department started to experiment with a technology called packet switching, which is what the ARPANET was based on. This was a way of sending data around among computers on dedicated telephone circuits as if they were little electronic postcards. So if you think for a minute about what you know about postcards, you actually know quite a bit about how the internet works. Because a postcard has a to address and a from address, and it's got a little bit of content. Well, an internet packet is just that way. It has a source address and a destination address and some content. Now, when you put a postcard in the postal system, there's no guarantee that it comes out the other end. This is what's known as a best effort system. And the same is true of the internet. When you put an internet packet in, there's no guarantee that it comes out the other end. When you put two postcards in the post box, there's no guarantee that they'll come out in the same order that you put them in. This is also true of internet packets. They don't guarantee that to stay in order. So we have this interesting problem that you have a network which potentially loses things. It potentially gets things out of order. And in fact, it even does something that the post office doesn't do. Sometimes when you put a packet into the internet, two of them come out on the other end. Because they may go in different paths, and actually both of them get delivered. Well, as far as I know, the post office doesn't do that. But here we have this relatively odd design where the data is flowing through like millions of little internet postcards, and it doesn't look very reliable at the internet layer. So we put new layers of procedure above that. We call these protocols. And the one above the internet protocol, or the IP protocol, is called TCP, for Transmission Control Protocol. That's the thing that retransmits if something gets lost, puts things back in order, and throws away duplicates. And the way it works is pretty simple. Imagine for just a moment that you have a book and you want to send it to your friend. So I'm going to send Bill a book, but I'm only allowed to send it through a postal service that carries postcards. So my problem is, how do I send a book through a postcard transport system? Well, the first thing I'll have to do is tear the pages out of the book and cut them up so they fit on the postcards. Then I recognize that because I've cut the pages up, not every postcard has a page number. And since I know they might get out of order, I decide I better number the postcards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so Bill can get them and put them back in order if they arrive out of order. Then I remember that some of them are going to get lost, or might get lost, so I keep copies in case I have to send duplicates to recover from a loss. And then I wonder, well, how do I know whether I should send any duplicates? Well, I could ask Bill every once in a while to send me a postcard saying, I got all the postcards up to number 420, please start sending anything that was missing. Then I realized that that postcard that Bill was sending might get lost. So now what? And the answer is, you look at your watch and you say, how long has it been since I heard anything from Bill? And if I haven't heard anything soon enough, I'll start sending duplicates to him until I hear from him that he's gotten all of them. That's basically how the TCP protocol works on top of the internet protocol. And now you know how the internet works. I left out some details like, how does the routing work, and what are domain names, and, what's the World Wide Web. But the basics are there. Okay. The second thing that goes on in this network, we have I left out the important story here. So what is this all about? This is the famous anonymous SRI International Packet Radio Bank. When the ARPANET was successful, DARPA decided to try out this packet switching idea in other modalities, radio in particular, ground mobile radio, and satellite. So the ground mobile system, the packet radio system, was actually built here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Don Nielsen was the head of that project and oversaw the construction of this test experimental network. And among the things we needed to do was to drive up and down the Bayshore Freeway and measure how well the packet switching system was working in the presence of radio noise, deep fades from moving into certain parts where there are radio shadow and things of that sort. And so the story goes that the engineers drove this thing up and down the Bayshore and then pulled off to the side in order to do some measurements. And of course the driver is one of the engineers, so he got out and joined the rest of his colleagues in the back. And a police car came along and noticed there was no one in the cab of this rather nondescript looking vehicle. So he went around and knocked on the back. And they opened the door, and he looks inside and he sees these really geeky looking bearded folks with a lot of electronics and cathode ray tubes and radio gear and everything else. And he said, "Who are you?" And they said, according to the story, "We work for the government." And he says, "Which government?" But officer, we were only going 50 kilobits per second. So the radio van, this wonderful vehicle, was used for religious conversion also. We would take 4-star generals on rides around the Bay Area showing them how the packet radio system actually survived all kinds of problems, radio interference and the like. They would go in disbelief, and they would come out believing that this technology actually held some promise for the Defense Department. So with the tip of the hat to Don Nielsen and his folks. This van, by the way, is at the Computer History Museum now in Mountain View. Then the other piece was the packet satellite system. And this one was interesting because it was looking at the problem of communication among ships at sea or from ship to shore, distributing data around in a global network. In this case, what was interesting is that there were multiple ground stations, and they were all using the same satellite and the same satellite channel. So they were actually competing with each other for access to common resources in the satellite, and technologies were developed in order to allow that to work. So the three of those networks were the basis on which Bob Kahn and I designed the internet. He came to Stanford in the springtime of 1973 and said, "Look, we've got this ARPANET that works well. We have the packet radio network, which is lossy, things get out of order. We have this packet satellite system, which operates in packet switch mode, but it's at different speeds, and the packet sizes are different. So we have these different networks, all of them behaving like packet switch systems. The question is, how do we interconnect them together in order to make it look as if it's one big uniform network?" That was the internet problem. So over a period of about 6 months, Bob and I designed the basic network architecture and published a paper in 1974 called A Protocol for Packet Network Intercommunication. A copy of the IEEE magazine that has that paper in it is apparently for sale in some antiquarian bookstore in New York for $7,500. So of course I immediately looked in my files to see if I had any other copies of it. New retirement plan. Well, I wanted to mention one other important date, and that was November 22nd, 1977. For the first time, we got all three of the networks interconnected and operating at the same time. And it was an important milestone from my point of view. I was in Washington at ARPA as the program manager for this thing. It was the first time we could show that all three of these networks would actually interwork successfully and essentially transparently. But I have to tell you, it was a pretty amazing demonstration. Bayshore Freeway and its packet radio van are going up and down, transmitting data through the packet radio network to a gateway to the wireline ARPANET. The packets went through the ARPANET, through an internal satellite inside of the ARPANET, which just looked like it was another link in that network, all the way to London, where it emerged from the extension of the ARPANET through another gateway to the packet satellite system, back down to Etam, West Virginia, to another satellite ground station, all the way across the internet to a computer at Marina del Rey, California, just north of the airport. Now, as the crow flies, that's about 440 miles from San Francisco to Los Angeles, but the packet actually went 88,000 miles when you go all the way up to satellite level and down and up and down and back and forth across the Atlantic and the continent. So these packets actually made it all the way through to Marina del Rey and then all the way back, of course, to the packet radio van. So this was a big milestone for me, and I remember making this picture and hanging it up in my office as a milestone for let's see, it was George Halmeyer was running the Defense Department's ARPA agency at the time, and I remember showing this to him back then, proud of the fact that we actually made it work. Now, if we fast forward to 1999, this is what the internet looked like. And about all you can tell is that it got bigger, and it got more complex, and it got more colorful. And I think that's as good a definition of the internet as you could come up with right now. It's gotten much bigger than it was when it started. In fact, it's very interesting to see where the users are on this system. If you look at the distribution, you notice that Asia is now the single largest region of use of the internet. Almost 400 million people in India, China, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, and so on. That number is going to get bigger, partly just because of demographics. 56% of the world's population is in Asia. So more and more people will be using the internet from that part of the world. That implies different languages on the network than the ones that are commonly available now. You'll see different scripts, things that are not written in Latin, but they're in Hindi and Arabic or Urdu or Kanji or Hangul and so on. All the languages of Asia will show up. Europe is actually the next largest group of population with 314 million users. Of course, Europe is funny because it keeps redefining itself by adding new countries. So it's a little hard to figure out, what's going to happen in Europe in the future. But North America is now only third, whereas 10 years ago, if I'd been here speaking to you, we would have been the top and largest group using the network 10 years ago. So these statistics tell us that the internet is now vastly more diverse than it was, certainly from the beginning, and certainly even in the last 10 years. Now, I had a t-shirt made that says IP on everything. I don't know whether you can see that. This is actually a very important principle. When Bob Kahn and I were doing the design, we knew in 1973 that we did not know what new transmission and switching technologies would be invented. But we wanted the internet to be able to use them. So we wanted to future-proof the design of the system. So we said, okay, it's important that these little electronic postcards, the internet packets, be able to be carried on anything, an optical fiber, a radio channel, a twisted pair, copper, anything that can carry a bag of bits from point A to point B with some probability greater than 0 is all that we're asking of the underlying system, and all the other hard work to keep things in order, to retransmit what happened at the edges of the net. So I had this t-shirt made that says IP on everything because that's basically what we were trying to do. And for the last 35 years or so, it's been very successful. Every new transmission and switching technology that's come along has been swept into the internet as another underlying transmission or switching system. But there's another interesting implication here. This means that the packets don't care how they're carried. They don't care if it's over a satellite link or an optical fiber. But the packets don't know what they're carrying. All these little packets know is that they have some bits in them, but they don't know whether it's video or audio or a piece of email or a piece of a web page. All these packets know is that they're supposed to take the bits from here to there and dump them off at the edge of the net. This led to the notion of an end-to-end principle, which basically says only the computers at the edges of the internet actually know what data is flowing through the system. They're the only ones that know what applications are being supported. So the net itself is completely application independent and ignorant. Some people call this the stupid network. And the whole idea was that it didn't have to know what kinds of applications were being invented. The consequence of that is a cornucopia of innovation. Because you didn't have to get permission from some internet service provider to put up a new application, you didn't have to change the network to put up a new application. It was possible for people to try new ideas out without any permission at all. And so all of the new applications on the internet that have evolved over the last 10 or 15 years have simply happened because people could try things out. Google didn't have to get permission from anyone to try out its applications, nor did Amazon or Yahoo or eBay or Skype or any of the other popular applications and services on the net They just did whatever they wanted to do, and if people were excited about it and interested, they had access to it because the network was transparent. Well, it's pretty clear that radio has become a very important part of the network because it allows for mobility. Certainly in this building, it wouldn't surprise me if there is wireless internet service available, and you can move from room to room. You don't have no wireless internet? This must be repaired. This is not acceptable. It doesn't cost very much to put in a wireless capability. So, wherever the facilities committee is, we're having a meeting after this discussion. Second, if you're looking for high speed, optical fiber is terrific, digital subscriber loops are terrific. There's only one problem with the current broadband offerings, and that is that they are asymmetric. What I mean by this is that you can pull data in from the net faster than you can push it out, because the way the high-speed service works, it gives you higher capacity from the network and less capacity into it. Now that would be okay if most of what you did was download stuff off the net. And for a long time, that's exactly what was happening. But now, as people have the ability to produce their own video, produce their own audio, produce their own web pages and blogs, people want to push information into the network just as much as they want to pull it out. And so I think that this asymmetric kind of service is going to be unsatisfactory for many of us, and we'll be looking for high-speed, symmetric capability to and from the network. Now, one small little technical detail, and this is actually important in historical terms. The internet that you're using today was based on a design that was standardized in 1977. It's called IP version 4. We're going to run out of unique internet addresses, things that tell you where there are unique terminations in the net. There were only 4.3 billion terminations made available in this IP version 4. Now, 1977 represented 4 years into the experiment, and I thought at the time that the Defense Department probably would not need more than 4.3 billion terminations in order to demonstrate that packet switching and internet made sense. So I thought what would happen is we demonstrate that it worked, and then if it worked, we would invent the production version. But that didn't happen. The internet just kept growing, and eventually became commercially available in the late 1980s and early 1990s. So the side effect of that is that we are going to run out of the IP version 4 address space. It's kind of like running out of telephone numbers. So there's a new version called IP version 6, and if you're keeping track and wondering what happened to IP version 5, that was an experiment in streaming audio and video that didn't work out, so we just abandoned that and went on to the next version, 6. Version 6 has 128 bits of address space, and if you do the arithmetic, that means 340 trillion addresses. Now, I used to go around saying that's enough address space, so every electron can have its own web page if it wants to. Until I got an email from some guy at Caltech, "Here, Dr. Cerf, you jerk, there's 10 to the 88th electrons in the universe, and you're off by 50 orders of magnitude." So I don't say that anymore. But it's enough address space to last until after I'm dead, and then it's somebody else's problem. So that's where we're headed, IP version 6, starting in 2008. There are some interesting social and economic effects of this internet propagation. One of them is that the consumers of information are now becoming the producers. It used to be that in mass media there were a large number of receivers and a small number of transmitters, whether it was book publication, newspapers, magazines, radio, television, all the mass media tended to be small number of producers, large numbers of consumers. Internet inverts that. Now we have people blogging, we have people uploading their videos to YouTube and Google Video and elsewhere. We have people creating their own web pages. So we have a very democratizing environment for the production of and sharing of information, unlike anything we ever had before. We have the ability for groups of people to discover and interact with each other. So the side effect of that is quite challenging for businesses because of the business models of mass media that were based on the idea that a small number of producers set the pace and determine the content is turned on its head. And so for a number of people, that's a major change. In fact, let me just pick one other thing on this slide to emphasize. A few months ago, I went to a computer store and I bought 1 terabyte, 1 trillion bytes of disk memory to take home to use. And I paid about $1,000 for that. Now, already I've had several people tell me in the past that I overpaid, that they could get a terabyte of disk memory for $300, so obviously I went to the wrong store. But I remember buying some disk memory in 1979. I bought 10 million bytes of disk memory in a thing the size of a shoebox, and it cost me $1,000 in 1979. So I got curious and I said, well, what would have happened in 1979 if I tried to buy 1 trillion bytes of memory at 1979 prices? And, you know, if you do the calculation, it would have cost $100 million in 1979. And now I have to admit to you, I didn't have $100 million in 1979. I still don't have $100 million. But I can guarantee you that if I had $100 million in 1979, my wife would not let me spend it on disk memory. She would have had a better idea. So what's happened is that the cost of digital things has just dropped dramatically. The cost of storage has dropped, the cost of processing has dropped, the cost of transmission has dropped. And that is having a dramatic effect on some people's business models. For example, suppose that you thought you'd like to build a store that sold CDs and DVDs, and you wanted to have a big inventory, lots of choice. How about 1 million DVDs and CDs? Well, first you'd have to have a store that's big enough to hold all that physical inventory. Then you realize that you're only going to get a market that's a function of distance away from that store. If you wanted to build a market, you have to build more stores. Transmitting this data online is less expensive, it's faster, and in fact, if you need to replicate it, you can do it on the spot. So if you have a very popular movie and you needed multiple copies of that movie, you can do it instantly at the theater. You don't have to wait for somebody to print another 35mm canister and send it to you physically. So these economics are really changing the way people work on the net. I mentioned mobiles before. I don't want to overstay this one topic, but I did want to mention that they are no longer just telephones. I'm sure many of you have these. This is the BlackBerry. It does have some challenges. You notice the size of the screen, it's about the size of a 1928 television set. It has variable data rates depending on where you happen to be inside of a building or whatever the local facilities are, and a keyboard that's suitable for people that are 3 inches tall. So it's a challenge to offer products and services through these devices, but it's programmable, and that's what's important. All you need to do is to download some new software in order to make this do some new application. Moreover, some people are starting to use these as devices for making payments. In places in the world where the mobile is the only communications device available, some people are using minutes of the mobile system as a means of currency, as a way of paying for things. You can transfer minutes from one account to another, and those minutes are worth money. And so the mobile industry is actually becoming an infrastructure for payments, creating a kind of a microeconomy. So this has turned out to be a pretty exciting outcome because it means that people who don't have bank accounts, don't have checking accounts, don't have credit cards, but they have mobiles, suddenly have an instrument that allows them to grow the local economy in ways that they couldn't before. So we're very excited at Google about the potential of mobile devices to bring new information and new opportunities to people around the world. The other thing that's interesting about these mobile devices is that they are essentially information portals. So what we notice is that when you carry your information portal around with you, that you often have need of information about what's going on around you. Where is the nearest Thai restaurant? How do I find the nearest ATM machine? How do I get to a particular building on the Stanford campus? Those kinds of questions can be answered with these devices. especially if you have databases that are what we will call geographically indexed. That is to say, the information in the database is indexed by where that information is located. So if I have the latitude and longitude or the street address of something, I can create this geographically indexed database, make it accessible through the mobiles, and therefore help people with information that is important to them based on where they are right now. And so the value of geographically indexed information has skyrocketed as a consequence of that. Well, I have to tell you that I have been astonished at the kinds of devices that have been connected to the internet. I certainly never anticipated that a refrigerator would become an internet appliance, or for that matter, a picture frame. I remember the first time somebody ran into my office and said, Vint, did you see the internet-enabled picture frame? And I remember thinking, boy, that sounds about as useful as an electric fork. In fact, it's a very clever device. There are a number of them made now, and you plug into the wall to get power, and you plug into the telephone system or into an Ethernet connection, and this little picture frame wakes up every 24 hours, logs onto the internet, goes off to a website, and says, what do you want me to do now? And it will say, well, download these pictures and display them, and erase these pictures, put up this news information, and then just cycle through. It's really nice for the grandparents, right? They don't have to boot up Windows and figure out how to log into the internet. They just turn the little picture frame on and it runs by itself. So we have a half a dozen of these around the U.S., and all of us have digital cameras. So we upload pictures of the grandchildren and the nieces and nephews, and you get up in the morning and have a look at this little picture, and you can see what's going on in your family. Now, those of you who have any interest at all in security will appreciate that if this little picture frame is downloading images from a website, and if the website gets hacked, the grandparents may see pictures on the picture frame that they hope are not of the grandchildren. So suddenly, this becomes, security becomes important, not only at work, but at home as well. Well, the guy that takes the cake is the one in the middle. This guy invented an internet-enabled surfboard. Now, he's out in San Diego somewhere, and I guess he was sitting on the water waiting for the next wave, thinking, gee, if I had a laptop in my surfboard, I could be surfing the internet while I'm waiting to surf. So he built a laptop into his surfboard, and now he sells that as a product with the wireless internet access on the rescue shack back on the shore. So I actually believe that there are going to be billions of devices on the internet. I sound like Carl Sagan. Billions and billions of devices on the network. Many of them appliances that we don't normally think of as being programmable at all, let alone network. And so the consequence of that is really pretty interesting. Some of these devices are already there. When you go to a hotel, you'll find a web TV with a little wireless keyboard. Sometimes the programmable digital assistants like these are now part of the net. The surfboard, there are washing machines, picture frames. I am fascinated by the idea of an internet-enabled refrigerator. Now, some of you probably use these toll road devices that you stick on the windshield of the car. They use what are called radio frequency identification devices, or RFIDs. You hit them with a pulse of radio energy, and they radiate back the account number that's supposed to be decremented as you go through the toll gate. But you can imagine having the products that you put into the refrigerator with a little RFID chip in them. So now the refrigerator, if it has a detector, could figure out what it has inside. So you can imagine coming home and seeing your internet-enabled refrigerator with a nice liquid crystal touch-sensitive panel surfing the network looking for recipes that it could make with what it knows it has inside the refrigerator. So when you come home, you see a nice list of things for dinner. Now you can extrapolate this. You can imagine going on vacation and you get an email. And it's from your refrigerator. It says, I don't know how much milk is left, but you put it in there 3 weeks ago and it's going to walk out on its own if you don't do it. Or maybe you're at the grocery store and your mobile goes off. It's an SMS message from your refrigerator. Don't forget the marinara sauce. I have everything else I need for spaghetti dinner tonight. Now, I'm sorry to tell you that the Japanese have spoiled the whole thing. They've invented an internet-enabled bathroom scale. So you step on the scale, and it figures out which family member you are based on your weight. And it sends that information to the doctor, and it becomes part of your medical record. Well, that's probably okay, right? Except for one problem. The refrigerator is on the same network. So when you come home, you see diet recipes coming up. Or maybe it just refuses to open. We don't have a lot of time to go through all of the examples of what happens when internet enables everything. But because Burton Richter is here tonight, I'm honored by his presence, I have to tell you about my idea for dealing with the Nobel Prize for people who are in the computer science world. As you may know, there is no Nobel Prize for mathematics. And some of you may think, well, what about economics and the Nash theorem and so on? Yes, but that's not Mr. Nobel's money. That was money from another source, even though it's awarded by the committee. So and the reason I'm told that there is no Nobel Prize for mathematics or any branch of mathematics, which unfortunately tends to include computer science, which rules me and my colleagues out, is that the story goes that Mr. Nobel's wife ran away with a very good mathematician. And he forbade the committee to spend any money on mathematics. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it makes a great story. So here I am thinking, well, what can we do? Us poor people in the math and computer science world. And I thought, okay, how about this? You remember that one of the peculiar things about quantum physics is that these particles can sometimes be in more than one state at the same time. And my recollection is that Erwin Schrödinger tried to explain this odd phenomenon by describing a thought experiment. He said, imagine you have a box and you put a cat in the box and you put in a capsule of cyanide, inside of which is some radioactive substance. And if an alpha particle is emitted, it will break the cyanide capsule and the cat will die. Now, no cats were harmed, by the way. This is a thought experiment. You haven't heard anything. So if you seal this whole system up and you ask, well, what's the state of the cat? The answer is you don't know. It could be either alive or dead, and you have to treat the closed box as a system that is in both states at the same time until you open up the box to find out the answer. Well, I believe that a bottle of wine must be a giant quantum particle, because if you think about it, until you open it up, it's either absolutely horrible or absolutely wonderful or something in between, and you don't know until you pull the cork. So I'm going to submit my theory of quantum wine bottles to the committee, and I hope that they'll recognize the brilliance of all this. Now, in the meantime, what we can do is put a memory stick inside the cork, these little random access memory sticks. And then we could record when the wine was put into the bottle, and maybe we could put in the temperature and the humidity at daily intervals. So if you're thinking about opening a bottle of wine, you can interrogate the cork and find out that on July 4th, 1997, the temperature rose to 120 degrees Fahrenheit because the air conditioning failed. That's the bottle you give to a friend who doesn't Okay, so I don't have time to do the rest of these. I'm going to skip over some stuff here because I realize that I'm potentially running way over time. Let me see. Okay, so let me finish up with one last report for you. Now, it's important that you understand that what I'm about to explain is not a Google project. So I don't want you leaving the room, calling your broker saying, Google's business model is to take over the solar system. That's not what we're doing. This is a project that I started in 1998 with the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. It has to do with the essential expansion of the operation of the internet across the solar system. Now, we instrumented planet Earth pretty thoroughly. We have orbiting satellites, we have sensors on the ground, on water, under the ground, under the water, and more of them are needed in order to understand the dynamics of climate change, for example. We're also very interested in what's going on Mars, or what has gone on Mars in the past, and we're beginning to instrument that planet. Typically, the way this has worked is that we've been using a 1964 designed deep space network with 3 big 70-meter dishes in Goldstone, California, in Madrid, Spain, and in Canberra, Australia. So as the Earth is rotating, those big dishes are able to see pretty far into the possible communications equipment on board these sensor systems deep into the solar system. So typically, the Deep Space Net is forming a direct radio link to these various space platforms. Some of them, of course, make it all the way onto the ground in the form of sensor systems, or you'll remember the 1997 Pathfinder that landed on Mars and sent back all those really great pictures of Mars and other data. And more recently, there are rovers on Mars, which are bigger than the Pathfinder. They landed in 2004 in January. One on one end of the Gusev Plain and the other Meridian Aquanum. They've been sending data back now for 3 years. The original project was only supposed to last like 90 days. And one of the reasons that it was thought that this system would not last more than about 90 days is that the spacecraft are using solar panels in order to recharge batteries so that they could last during the Martian nights. These are the things that look like big black wings. What we thought was that over time, these solar panels would become more and more dusty. And the more dust there was, the less efficient the panels would be at converting sunlight to electricity, until finally one day the batteries would not be sufficiently charged up so that as the Martian sunrise occurred, the devices wouldn't wake up. Well, in fact, these things have stayed cleaner than we expected. Personally, I think there's somebody up there dusting them. But we haven't caught them on the cameras yet. So a more likely explanation is that on Mars there are little dust storms, and like little dust devils, and they're actually blowing the dust off of the solar panels. You can see evidence of this from the orbiting satellites, for example, and also from some of the imagery from the ground. So that's why these things have lasted for much longer than we expected. We have orbiting satellites around Mars, and there are 4 of them, although one of them just died last November. The Mars Global Surveyor, after 10 years of operation, finally failed. But the other 3 are in operation, and the most recent one, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, went into orbit just last year and has been operating since then. What's rather interesting is that the original design of the system had data that was being transmitted from the ground directly back to the big Deep Space Network. When they turned those radios on, it turned out after about 20 minutes they overheated, and they had to turn them off to avoid having them harm themselves. And so the duty cycle for transmitting data was reduced because of that. And second, the data rate that was sustainable was fairly low, 28,000 bits per second. The engineers at JPL decided there might be an alternative way of moving the data back. And they reprogrammed Mars Odyssey, for example, one of the other orbiters, so that the rover on the ground could transmit data up to the orbiting satellite, which would hold onto it until it got around in its orbit so it could transmit the data back to Earth. Now that's what's called store and forward, which, by the way, is exactly how the Internet works. The Internet is a store and forward system. So this is one of the first times that in deep space applications we use that kind of technique in order to relay data back. Before that, it had always been kind of a radio relay where you just change frequencies as you go back to Earth. Well, this is pretty exciting for those of us who want to extend the operation of the Internet across the solar system, because now we have evidence of the utility of that style of operation. So what we have done over the past almost 10 years now is to develop a new set of protocols that will work across the interplanetary distances. We originally thought we could use the standard TCP/IP protocols to do this. That lasted about a week, and then we realized that there were real problems. The biggest problem is that the distances between the planets is literally astronomical. And it turns out that at the speed of light, it takes something like 4 minutes for a radio signal to go from Earth to Mars, and of course a similar time back. And then at the farthest points where we're apart, we're like 235 million miles apart when we're in our respective orbits, and that takes almost 20 minutes one way. Now, the Internet protocols were not designed to deal with 40-minute round-trip times. And imagine surfing the network and clicking the mouse and then waiting for 40 minutes for the first bit to come back. Now, I know some of you probably have network actions out of that. At least that's not because of interplanetary distances. So that was a problem. Then the other problem we ran into is that there's this thing called celestial motion. And you put something on the surface of Mars, and Mars insists on rotating. So after a while, you can't talk to it. Well, that messed up the TCP protocols too. So we ended up designing a whole new suite of protocols that we call delay and disruption tolerant networking protocols in order to deal with some of these problems that show up in interplanetary communication. We've now got to the point where protocols are designed, they've been tested terrestrially, and NASA is now considering making them part of the standard architecture for the future. In the meantime, we went back to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency and we said, we think you have a problem terrestrially with delay and disruption in military communications, in tactical communications, where people may be jamming the network, you may be hiding under a bridge in radio shadow and you can't communicate. So we started testing these delay and disruption tolerant protocols with the Marine Corps. And the application was so successful in the test that they ran off with our equipment to Iraq with it. And I said, wait, it's an experiment. And they said, no, it isn't. And they took it with them. So we now at least have evidence that these systems that were designed originally for interplanetary communication are actually useful in a terrestrial environment as well. So here's what we're hoping will happen. We hope that eventually we'll send people out around the solar system. We hope that they'll have comfortable places to stay because it's a pretty hostile environment out there. But in the long run, what we hope is that by standardizing the communication protocols used in deep space, that every time you launch a new mission somewhere in the solar system, if there are any previous missions that are currently operating and are using these standard interplanetary protocols, that they will become assets to support the new mission. So over time, we hope we will accumulate an interplanetary backbone that will support exploration by robotic means and by manned means over time, all of them supplying the same kind of standard opportunity for communication that we get today on planet Earth. Because of the standards of the internet, when you plug your computer into the internet, you can talk to those 400 million other machines that are on the system. Because everything is standardized, we want the same thing to be true for the interplanetary space. So that ends my formal contribution to this afternoon. I promise that I would be available for questions if you have them, but I won't be offended by anybody who would like to leave now. But if you have questions, theoretically, we have a microphone that we can run around with, but I don't know if it works. What's the status? It said it's dead? Why does this remind me of Star Trek, where Dr. McCoy says it's dead, Jim? Well, I can still try to answer questions, but I may have to hop down and run around in the crowd because I'm hearing impaired too. But if there are questions, why don't we try? I'll just jump down here. That's what evangelism is about. Okay, yes, sir.
You're in the heart of entrepreneurialism in this valley. Back in 1969 or so, did you ever consider making this a proprietary system and charging 1 cent per?
As Bill suggested.
Exactly.
Actually, this is a really good question. The question is, did Bob Kahn and I think about making this a proprietary system and actually charging people to use it? The answer is yes, we considered that, and we decided deliberately not to do that. And the reason was very straightforward. We knew that we had a problem in the Defense Department because every time the Defense Department would buy computers, this is back now in the 1960s, if you needed to make a network with those computers, they had their own proprietary protocols. So HP had one set of protocols, Digital had another, IBM had another. They could talk to within the same kind of computer network, but we couldn't get them to interwork very well. And we thought it would be a bad thing if the Defense Department wanted to rely heavily on networking to be confined to only one particular brand. So what we wanted was a protocol that would be non-proprietary and moreover would be globally accepted as a standard. So we set out deliberately to design something that had no constraints with regard to intellectual property. We didn't want any barriers or excuses for someone to say, I don't want to implement that because I have my own proprietary protocol. Why should I license yours? I have my own, thank you very much. So we didn't want that. We wanted a standard. Now, we had no guarantee, of course, that this would become a standard, but we knew if we made it proprietary, it would just increase the difficulty. So we deliberately decided not to do that, and I'm pretty sure that was the right decision. I really doubt seriously so I don't think we would be where we are now without that philosophy. Yes, sir, let me get this one and then I'll get yours.
I keep losing my socks.
Okay. Where is the missing sock? Okay. Well, remember I mentioned the RFID chips that the refrigerator could use to figure out what it has inside? Well, what if your socks were internet enabled? You can imagine, you interrogate the sock drawer and it sends back an answer saying, well, there are 17 matched pairs of socks, but sock number 144L is missing. So you send a multicast radio message around the house. And you get back the response. This is sock 144L. I'm under the sofa in the living room. We solved the problem of the missing sock. I mean, what a huge contribution to society. That's the story. Yes, sir, you had a question.
Would you comment on internet neutrality?
Yes. Actually, the phrase that's used is network neutrality, but you're quite right, it is in the context of internet. Many of us have seen this internet be such a big engine for innovation and have asked ourselves, what is it that permitted that degree of innovation and invention? I alluded earlier to the idea of innovation without permission. The idea that once you pay to be on the internet at whatever capacity you are willing to pay for and can afford, that you're free to use the net any way you wish. And of course, illegal activities would be still illegal. But the idea is that you should not be constrained by the supplier of basic internet service as to what applications you offer or what applications you can reach. As the broadband system comes up, there's been a significant change in the atmosphere surrounding the internet. When the internet was a dial-up system, there was no problem getting changing your internet service provider. You just dialed a different number. And so there were literally thousands of internet service providers around the United States, and you could switch easily from one to the other by just changing the number you dialed. When broadband came along, the story was quite different. Statistically, not everyone in the United States has access to broadband. 10% of the population doesn't have any access at all. And the data from the FCC, which are a little biased, not by any malice intended, but simply because of the way the data is collected, these data suggest that at most 60% of the population has a choice of either DSL or cable, which are the two primary broadband services. And another 30% have a choice of either one or the other, but not both. And the actual data suggests that there's even less competition than that. So the problem here is that we don't have the kind of competition we had in the dial-up network. As a consequence, in the absence of heavy competition, there is a very strong potential for the owner of or controller of the underlying broadband access to make use of that control by interfering with competing higher level applications. So to give you an example, suppose that you are a telephone company, you put in digital subscriber loops or fiber, and you decide that you're going to sell internet service this way, and you're also going to offer streaming video as a service. And then you notice that there may be competitors out there, somewhere else in the internet, not necessarily just in the US, but anywhere else, also trying to reach your subscriber with streaming video. And you decide you don't want the competition. So you make use of the fact that you have control over the underlying transport medium to interfere with your competitors. Or alternatively, you might say to the competitor, I'm sorry, I won't let you have access to my subscriber unless you pay me a toll. Now, up until this time, it has never been the case that there's been such a double payment required. Typically, what has happened is that the supplier of internet service provides two-way access to the internet to a subscriber who pays, and then the rest of the internet is connected and you use it however you want. So in the past year or so, the first inklings of a different business view emerged from the telco companies and less obviously from the cable companies. So the debate right now, which was hot last year and is somewhat more tepid right now, was whether there should be enacted in law something which says you must treat all of these customers equally and not not take advantage of the fact that you happen to be the supplier of the underlying transmission capacity. There used to be a time when there was something called common carriage, and there were common carriage obligations. There were rules called Computer 1, 2, and 3. Those rules established basic and enhanced service in the telecom environment. The FCC did away with all of those distinctions a couple of years ago, and the consequence of that is that internet is being treated as an information service without any common carriage requirement at all, leading some of us to believe that the market power of the small number of providers of broadband could be abused, and we thought we should codify a rule that says you shouldn't do that, or if you do that and we catch you doing it, there will be consequences. The debate, of course, is on the other side is why would we build this new broadband facility if we couldn't build business models that are favorable to us? And my reaction right now is that in the course of, if you introduce this kind of inequity, you will suppress some of the innovations on the network, which have been a consequence of the freedom to try anything out that you want to. So we at Google are very strongly in favor of this rather neutral kind of environment where anyone has an opportunity to try something else. And we're very concerned that we not introduce practices that would inhibit that kind of innovation. So that's been my long sermon on the subject of net neutrality. Let me get Bill, and then I'll get this gentleman over here. Yes,
Mr. Vint, can you tell us something about Google's big library project, what stage it is, where it's going?
Okay, Bill's question is about the library project. We now have something like a dozen libraries at different universities cooperating with us to allow us to scan the books that are in their library. In fact, there are more libraries offering us the opportunity to do that than we can actually manage. So we've had to pace the growth of this program according to the amount of capability we have to scan all the materials. We continue to have discussions with the intellectual property community, book publishers in particular, about their concerns, which are that in the process of scanning these books, that we might be putting things up on the net that they consider to be under copyright. And so the debate continues there. For certain volumes which are published before something like 1894, there is no question that there is copyright is now expired. For other materials, about 15% of published books are definitely under copyright or still in print. And we even know who holds the copyright. But there's a large chunk of material which is possibly still under copyright, but is not in print. And it's been almost impossible for us to identify the copyright holder. In fact, there are people who make a business out of helping you find the copyright holder for a particular book or other work. So we continue to take the view that we should be able to scan all this material. If there is uncertainty as to its copyright situation, we wouldn't actually put the content up for view. We would only allow people to search it and then tell them that this book exists and that the contents match the search that you just did. You might be interested in getting this book. It might be available at the following libraries, or you might want to go to Amazon, or you might go to eBay or some other source to actually get the book. What we want to do is help people know that there's information locked up in books that they might want to know about, in addition to whatever information is already online. So we continue to press along on that. The other thing that we're very interested in is things that have never been published, maps, manuscripts, and things of that kind. Those could be invaluably useful for research if they could be available in an online form. So we're pursuing that as well. Yes, sir.
When you were setting up the ARPANET, you were primarily involved with file transfer protocols. Today, we spend most of our time looking at web pages. From a technical point of view, what is the World Wide Web and how did it come about?
In principle, what's happening is that when you connect your computer to a website, it's transmitting a file full of information which you display on your screen. The information that's sent in the early stages of the World Wide Web, which by the way was invented by a man named Tim Berners-Lee, who was at CERN, the Center for European Nuclear Research, in the late 1980s, looking for ways to help physicists share their information, especially information that included charts, graphs, and photographs, in addition to text. So he was trying to find a way to represent the information and help people find it by electronically pointing to it, by hyperlinking. That was his original motivation. That, of course, has blossomed into a remarkable avalanche of information flowing into the internet. So today there are literally tens of billions of web pages that are out there on the net. And they're accessible through browsers, which run in your laptops and desktops. Google, among others, like Yahoo and MSN and so on, make a business out of indexing all of that content. And in fact, one reasonable mind picture of the World Wide Web is that in spite of the hyperlinking that points from one website to another, without this indexing capability, it would be as if you walked into the New York Public Library after an earthquake where all the books fell on the floor and there's no card catalog. So, or even if you have a card catalog, you couldn't find books if they fallen off the shelves. The internet has a little bit of the character like that, and so the indexing is a huge help to find things in this morass of data. We are, I would say, only 1% into the real depth of understanding how to manage and help people find relevant information. It's all syntactic, it's all string matching. We haven't even begun to really dig deep into semantics, which is the thing that Tim Berners-Lee is now working on. He calls it the semantic web. And he wants people to be able to search this mass of information on the basis of concepts and conceptual ideas, and not simply on the basis of a string of letters that might match the string in some piece of text elsewhere. So this is a marvelous time to be alive because there's all these new problems that we have to solve. And I'm so happy that Google was next door to Stanford because we got this flow of really smart students coming into the company. And I have to stop because I'm way over time.
I think if we let the questions go on, we might be here till 7 o'clock. But I think that there are people who have things to do, and I think